Hello, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. Happy birthday, Sarah.
Aw, thank you.
How you doing today?
When you're older, my birthday isn't when this episode's coming out, but I am celebrating my birthday on the day we are recording. Ben took me out to Hot Pot.
That's a type of restaurant.
I feel like a lot of people know what Hot Pot is.
I didn't until you started going to one. So.
Oh, okay. Well, he took me to a place where it's like fondue, but with soup.
Yeah.
And then he gave me a cookbook called Texture Over Taste, which I am very excited for. And he also got me a book that is called It Came From the Closet. It's a collection of essays that are reflections on queer identity and horror movies. So I'm very excited to get into both of those, but not for this podcast.
Sure.
Today we are covering something completely different. But before we get into that, Ben, how are you?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
I've been busy lately and tired, but I am happy to be doing the show with you today.
Yeah, me too. What are we watching today?
Today, Sarah, we are watching Tower of London from 1962, directed by Roger Corman. It's sort of a pseudo-historical, pseudo-horror movie. We're going to find out just how historical it is and just how horror it is when we watch it. It's kind of a remake of an older film from 1939, and it has an interesting connection with that film. And it's mostly inspired by the historical events of the reign of the English King Richard III.
Yeah.
So we're not a Shakespeare podcast.
And we aren't a medieval Europe history podcast.
No. And I like medieval European history, and I like Shakespeare. And, you know, if you like these things, you know that one of the things we're going to have to talk about in this episode as part of our historical context setting that we always do is very complicated.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about what's called the War of the Roses.
Well, Sarah, can you walk us through the Cliff Notes version?
Yeah, it's a bit of a thorny issue.
Ooh.
But it certainly smells sweet.
Quit while you're ahead.
A war by any other name.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before I dive into the War of the Roses, I want to talk a little bit about what the Tower of London is.
That's so fair.
Because if you hear Tower of London, you think, okay, it's a tower in London.
Which it is like not at all.
Yeah. Plus, there are a lot of towers in London.
Yeah.
Why is this one called the Tower of London?
Yeah.
So the Tower of London consists of a central keep that is often called the White Tower and looks more like a little mini castle.
Yes.
That's walled in, where the first set of walls has these towers, but these towers also hold like apartments, so they aren't just like single staircase kind of towers. Like These are living quarters. They could be barracks for guards. People would live in these areas, and those towers are connected by wall segments. There's another wall around that.
Yeah, it's a castle.
Yeah. It was originally built in the 1070s by William the Conqueror. So it has a very long history. Over its, I'll say, 1,000 years of existing, it's been used as a residence with guard barracks, a prison, a torture and execution site. And in fact, it's actually tradition for a monarch to stay in the White Tower leading up to their coronation.
Yeah, like I feel like the rep it's got in general pop culture is like evil torture dungeon, but I feel like for the majority of its history, it was just the castle that the king had in London.
Yeah, and was meant to be like a really domineering symbol. Fun fact about like its use as like a prison and place of torture. It happened throughout its history, but in particular during the Tudor period, which happens after Richard III.
Yes.
Which is, I don't know, I think that's interesting considering what Richard III is known for.
Yeah.
And in fact, that like use of being a prison, being a site of torture is why you get that term developed of being sent to the tower of like, oh, you're in trouble. Like, no, you're getting sent to the tower. You're going to be locked away, probably executed. Now, there were many people kept here over this 1,000 years. And the tower is kind of made famous as a result because of the people who would stay there. But the story that most frequently comes to mind in pop culture and in the movie that we're going to be talking about today, Richard III's nephew princes who were kept in the tower and they mysteriously disappeared. So this sets up the place. The time that I'll be speaking about is the mid-15th century. This is when the Battle of the Roses is happening, where basically the York family and the Lancaster family were fighting over the British throne.
Yes. The red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York?
I didn't care to look up what color went with which family.
Well, that's why it's called the War of the Roses.
Yeah, they each had a rose.
As
symbol.
their emblem. Yeah.
One was red, one was white.
I'm pretty sure it's red Lancaster, white York. But anyways.
The monarch I'm going to focus in on, besides Richard III.
Yeah.
I think our story needs to start with Edward IV. So he's of the Yorks. He was crowned in 1461. He was briefly dethroned in 1470 and then reclaimed the throne the following year. So there's a lot going on with this essentially civil war. Now he has two younger brothers, Richard and George.
Yes.
George is the Duke of Clarence, so often people will just call him Clarence.
That's right.
Super, super simple and not confusing at all.
Once you like figure out that like in common parlance, you can call the Duke of or Count of or Earl of whatever just by the whatever, it's like that makes sense. I feel like the problem with the Duke of Clarence, George, the Duke of Clarence, is that Clarence
is a name.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were like calling Richard III Gloucester, because
yes.
he's Duke of Gloucester right now, like I don't know. I find it all very confusing.
You get used to it.
Now, because George, the Duke of Clarence, was suspected to have taken part in supporting the 1470 rebellion that led to Edward having to claim the throne again, he kind of gets thrown into the tower and dies. The common, I would say, turn of phrase is that he is drowned in a cask of Malmsey wine, which is basically a reference to the fact that he was a drunkard, but more than likely he was just killed like a normal way. So Edward IV had two sons, Edward V and Richard.
There's only like 3 names in all of England, folks.
Truly. He has like, I think it's like 3 or 4 daughters, but they aren't important. I'm not going to be talking about them. Now, when Edward IV, the king, died of illness in April 1483, his brother Richard was named Lord Protector until the son Edward could be crowned. Now, Edward V is around 12 years old at this time. Their mom, whose name is Elizabeth Woodville, she took her kids to Westminster Abbey for sanctuary in case of any like assassins or usurpers. This isn't her first rodeo of this type, and everyone's on edge, or let me rephrase, the Yorks are on edge because Henry Tudor is exiled in France right now, and there's always the threat of him coming back. Now, Elizabeth took all of her kids except for Edward V, who was at Ludlow Castle, which was like in the west of the country, where he was being educated on how to be a king. He's being escorted back to London when his uncle Richard, who himself had been in the north, meets up and decides to take custody. He is the Lord Protector, after all, and the previous escort members are quietly executed a month later.
Oof.
Now, Richard brings Edward V to the Tower of London for safety, which it makes sense. It's where he should be before the coronation anyways. That is planned in early July.
Yeah, like at this point, because the Tower is just the castle that's in London and it's like one of the king's residences and all this kind of stuff. Like, yes, people get kept there as prisoners, but it doesn't really, it's not like the dungeon. Like, it doesn't have that connotation yet.
Yeah, and even like the White Tower, so that central keep, that's where it's nice to stay. It's in like the wall apartments, we'll say, like the wall towers that you don't really want to be in.
Got it.
They're at least like, you know, small apartments, like a studio apartment.
Yeah. Small by royal standards.
Now, Edward is lonely, makes sense. He's 12. So his mom lets her only other son, Richard, who's 9, join him in the tower. Meanwhile, Parliament is kind of unsure about succession. You see, Edward IV was originally betrothed to someone before he broke that pre-contract of marriage to be with Elizabeth. Now, does this mean that his marriage is invalid and therefore his brother Richard should be king? Parliament, with pressure from lords, knights, and gentlemen, said, yep. So the kids were illegitimate, and the brother Richard was therefore crowned king in July 1483. Now, up to this point, his nephews, Edward and Richard, were seen around the tower. You know, they're hanging out, they're seen playing, they're seen through windows. After Richard III's coronation, the kids are seen less frequently until there are no sightings of them after the summer of 1484. The last that they had been seen was in the Garden Tower, which is kind of like the most southeast tower. Now, Richard III ruled until Henry Tudor started a rebellion and, quote, invaded Richard's territory in 1485, and Richard is killed on the battlefield. So Henry Tudor takes the throne. He becomes Henry VI. This is the start of the Tudor era, which lasts until 1603 and includes the Elizabethan era with Elizabeth I. Now, upon his death, Richard III is vilified against the heroic Henry Tudor. The mysterious disappearances of the young princes fed into this, because what cruel, heartless man would order the death of 2 innocent children along his quest for power?
It's a bad look, Richard. It's
a bad look. There are many paintings to this effect, some even showing the princes being like 5 and 6. They were 9 and 12. Not that excuses it. I'm just saying they're really emphasizing, oh, these poor innocent children against this horrible man who orders their death.
Right. And Richard was how old when this happened? Richard III?
He died when he was 33.
Got it. Okay. Because like I also feel like it's like, oh, look at this crusty old guy and these tiny babies. And it's like,
Yeah. Which again, like, we're not endorsing child murder.
No.
We're just saying like he gets vilified.
Yes. There's some propaganda going on.
The first story with this narrative comes from Thomas More in the book History of King Richard III, which was published in like 1557.
Thomas More was like Henry VIII's like main dude, basically.
William Shakespeare's Richard III historical play cemented this image into public consciousness. It was written, all these dates are very loose, but we'll say written in like 1592-ish, kind of published 1597. So all solidly within the Tudor era. And yeah, Shakespeare's play really cements who Richard is in public consciousness, as well as the use of the Tower of London for prison and torture.
Yeah, like Shakespeare's writing for Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth's grandfather is the one who defeated Richard III. So you're going to make Richard the bad guy.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Not only is Richard III this Machiavellian evil man with a lust for power, he was also hunchbacked with a crippled arm. He was ugly and no one liked him. Of course, this is all Tudor propaganda. Both his contemporaries, as well as, modern scholars looking back, consider Richard's laws fairly just and, honestly kind of good. They would emphasize, the common person and, got rid of some, weird taxes that were honestly a little predatory. His leadership decisions were positive, despite this very negative PR image. Now, in 1674, there were some renovations going on in the Tower of London, kind of related to the burning of London in 1666.
Sure.
But, not going into that. There were these 2 children's skeletons found in a wooden box hidden underneath a staircase.
Oof.
We don't really know for sure what happened, but it's pretty clear that these were the princes. Now, keep in mind, that's 200 years later, and also 1674. So, there's been analysis done now. There's no way to really definitively say.
Right.
The material is too old.
Yeah, it's listen, two little boys went missing, and we found 2 little skeletons. So we're kind of putting two and two together. Yeah, but we don't have, proof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we do know is Richard III is still a villainous figure in pop culture. So when director-producer Roland V. Lee and his writer brother Robert were looking for a new film idea in the 1930s, while traveling in the UK, they hit on the idea of the 1939 film Tower of London, which would star Basil Rathbone as Richard, Boris Karloff as the fictional man Mord, and a young Vincent Price as Clarence, who, if you remember, is the younger brother George, but they call him Clarence. So in the film, deaths of anyone between Richard and the throne, including Clarence, are his own doing. He actively conspires for them to happen or has Mord act as assassin, including 2 young boys as the princes. While they were making the film, they saw it as a historical epic that was Oscar-worthy. Universal marketed it as horror, and unfortunately, it achieves neither.
There's a reason we didn't do an episode on it way back when.
Yeah. Probably the best scene is between Basil Rathbone and Vincent Price. It's I was going to call it a drink battle. They're drinking to see who gets the land that Vincent Price's character believes should go to him because of marriage stuff. I won't get into it, but basically they drink each other under the table, and then Basil Rathbone as Richard gets Mord to put Clarence into the cask of wine.
Yeah, Vincent Price is very good in that scene. I think it's definitely, I would agree, the best scene in the movie.
And this is before Vincent Price is really anyone. So yes. It's not like a, fun cameo. It's a very early role.
Yeah.
So this film is, by a lot of critics, considered Roland Lee's best picture. For our count, Roland V. Lee's best movie is Son of Frankenstein, which came out earlier that year, 1939. We covered it in episode 66, and it ranks number 28.
Wow, it still ranks really high.
Yeah, because it's a good movie. But of course, we cannot talk about anything around Richard III without calling out Laurence Olivier's film adaptation of the Shakespeare play in 1955. It does such a fantastic job. It's obviously not horror. It's a true adaptation as a historical play. Laurence Olivier does many Shakespeare adaptations. He did Henry V in 1944, Hamlet 1948, Othello 1965, and Romeo and Juliet in 1968. I was sure he had done a Macbeth, but that was Orson Welles with Macbeth from 1948.
Yeah. Also, if you're going to be watching some Laurence Olivier Shakespeare movies, he also did a version of King Lear in the 80s when he was really old. That was a TV movie. Anyways, just skip Othello. You don't need to see Laurence Olivier's Othello. You can skip that one.
So that kind of takes us to Roger Corman's adaptation Or rather, he's not adapting in the same way.
Yeah.
But that brings us to 1962.
Yes. I think that Universal one from 39, like they marketed it as horror. They gave it the music from Son of Frankenstein. And because it's got Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff in it, like, and Karloff's playing a very like horror movie style character. Like they give him like all kinds of physical weirdities. I can see how it gets lumped in, but if you go into it wanting a horror movie, you're not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But also if you go into it wanting that historical epic, it's
really not it.
It's clear that like at some point they ran out of money.
Yes, they did. Due to many like hiccups in the production. So they like really scrambled to try to like finish the movie. Ultimately, Universal gave Lee the money to finish with the principal actors and then kind of just wrap up without all of the extras.
Right.
But the movie starts with like, this group of extras gets some lines. This group of extra gets some lines. And then it's just kind of like, quick, just wrap it up at the end.
Yeah, like there's a certain point in the movie where the editing style like speeds up a lot as if we're trying to like get through material. And there's two battle scenes in the movie, the Battle of Tewkesbury and the Battle of Bosworth Field, which are basically the battles where Richard wins and loses, respectively. And it looks like they maybe did like one battle scene and they're using like footage from one shoot to kind of be both battles, and they aren't great battles in terms of cinematic battles.
They at the time folks praised Roland Lee's ability to film them.
Really?
Yeah.
Oof.
Especially because like there's the first battle where it's like raining and there's mud everywhere. People were like, yeah, this is the chaos of battle.
Wow. Interesting. Because like not only do I think of like the Battle of Bosworth Field in Olivier's Richard III being much better, but I also think of like Wells's, I forget which battle it is, but like the battle in Chimes at Midnight.
Yeah.
And how much better that is.
But those are later.
We got to talk about
contemporary critics from 1939.
Very fair. Very fair. I'm just saying that the 39 movie's like not what you want it to be, which is what I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah.
As for the 62 movie, we're going to find out what it's like tonight here on Scream Scene. So the 1962 version of Tower of London came about because of a deal that Roger Corman made in 1961 with producer Edward Small to make films for United Artists. This was during the period of Corman's career where he was seeking ways to become free from AIP, which we sort of discussed when we talked about Premature Burial, where he was trying to find ways to like get out from under Arkoff and Nicholson. Now, Edward Small had been in Hollywood for a very long time. He was born Edward Schmalheiser in Brooklyn in 1891, and he was originally a talent agent, and he had a talent agency in New York that he moved out to LA in 1917 when the first wave of like the film industry moving from New York to LA happened. He started producing his own films in the 1920s, and over the course of his career, he produced films for United Artists. Then he moved to RKO, and then to Columbia, and then back to United Artists in the 50s over this like very long career. And his greatest string of successes was probably from the late 30s to late 40s, with a series of adventure films like The Count of Monte Cristo and two sequels to it, Last of the Mohicans, Man in the Iron Mask, Black Magic, and Gunga Din. Films he produced that we've seen for the podcast is mostly his 1950s output. He produced The Neanderthal Man.
Oh, what a shining star in his lapel.
It, The Terror from Beyond Space.
Okay.
Four Skulls of Jonathan Drake.
Okay.
Dr. Blood's Coffin. And The Snake Woman.
All right. A couple of like, all rights in there.
Yeah, but certainly by this point, Small's star has faded. So he's making cheap movies for United Artists. And I think in terms of this deal, Small was impressed with Corman's Poe films. And I think the two of them saw it as like, you know, Small was like, oh, here's this up and coming talent who's doing really great work at AIP. I can latch my star onto him and kind of like ride him back up the mountain, as it were. And for Corman, it was like, oh, I'm trying to get out of drive-in theaters and into like some real studios. This guy can get me into United Artists, right? So there's kind of this like feeling that the two of them could help one another at this point in their careers. So together with Gene Corman, Roger's brother, they brainstormed ideas for something that would be similar to the Edgar Allan Poe pictures, but not be Edgar Allan Poe. Not that like AIP had the rights to Poe, it's public domain stuff, but they had already shown when Corman tried to go independent with Poe with Premature Burial, a kind of vindictive willingness to like assert ownership over the idea, basically.
Yeah.
So they were looking for something similar that would be like literary period, lending itself towards horror. They considered the works of Nathaniel Hawthorne at first, which we should remember for later, before settling on Shakespeare. And the plan was to merge the stories of Macbeth and Richard III.
Okay.
For whatever reason, they thought Macbeth couldn't make a good horror movie on its own, which is interesting because Roman Polanski does a horror movie style Macbeth in the 70s. So they kind of took elements of Macbeth and fueled them into Richard III. Went with the title Tower of London to evoke that 1939 movie. But it's not a direct remake so much as it is another movie with the same title covering the same storyline that also has a horror connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what I tried to get across in like what I was saying is like why is Richard III coming up when we're talking about Tower of London? It's because of the princes.
Yes.
And because of like vilifying Richard III being so tied to the princes, like their disappearance is why there's a tower called the Bloody Tower, right? And gives Tower of London this like bloody, like horror element, even though like many other things happened there.
Yeah, exactly. So actor Leo Gordon, an actor best known for playing heavies, co-wrote the screenplay with Robert Kent, who was kind of one of Small's go-to guys. Other scripts we've seen from Leo Gordon include The Wasp Woman and Attack of the Giant Leeches.
Okay, nice. Those are both movies that we were like, kind of surprised by these.
Yeah, so you basically have like one of Corman's guys and one of Small's guys working together on this screenplay. Now, I say all this, but I mentioned that Corman and Small made this deal. It was a 3-picture deal to make films for United Artists. And the intended first picture for this deal was not, in fact, Tower of London. Even though it was like the desire to copy the Poe movies that led to this partnership on the part of Small. But when the partnership first came into effect, Corman was like, hey, I have this project that's kind of like ready to go. So the first picture that they were going to partner on was supposed to be The Intruder. Corman's adaptation of Charles Beaumont's novel of bigotry in the South, starring William Shatner. However, Small backed out of the production due to the subject matter, and so Corman ended up having to put $90,000 of his own money into the film, which then became the first of his movies not to turn a profit. So going into making Tower of London, Corman is already kind of pissed off at Small because he had backed out of this movie, which meant Corman had to risk his own money, and then Corman lost money for the first time in his career. And Corman was always very proud of The Intruder, and he was like, I'm fine with losing money on it. It was a film I thought needed to be made. But after The Intruder, he decided, like, I'm never doing another, like, serious message picture again. I am just going to stick to, like, stuff that's entertaining, and if I want to say something, I will, like, bury it as subtext, right? Because he felt the reason The Intruder didn't do well was that audiences don't like to be preached to. So Tower of London shot in London.
Oh, nice.
On a soundstage still. For 15 days on a budget of $200,000, which, to put that into perspective, that's something like a third of what the 1939 film was made for, not accounting for inflation.
Yeah.
Like the 1939 movie was made for like $580,000 in 1939.
Yeah, they had the budget that lent to them thinking
they were making an Oscar movie.
Exactly.
So this is being made for like a third of that.
Peanuts.
Almost 30 years later.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind. The primary cost that drove up the budget was the film's sets. And so Small and Corman clashed because Small kept having Robert Kent make changes to the script throughout shooting in order to eliminate elements of the story that were costing money to keep the budget down. And Corman found this extremely frustrating. But their biggest disagreement on this film happened just before shooting was going to begin, when Small came down to the set and told Corman that he would be shooting the picture in black and white. You see, like, this was meant to compete with the Poe films, which are widescreen color films. Mm-hmm. And so Corman thought he'd be shooting, it's a costume drama. It's 1962.
Yeah.
We're going to be shooting in color, of course. Now, something I haven't quite mentioned yet, but I should at this point, is that, in keeping with the aim to compete with the Poe films, Vincent Price was cast in the lead as Richard III. A nice upgrade after having been the Duke of Clarence in the 39 version. Now he gets the lead. He's Richard. Probably twice as old as Richard ever was. Small felt that Price had a built-in audience because of the Poe films, and that audience would come for Price no matter what, and not realize that the movie was in black and white. So the cost-cutting measure wouldn't hurt the film. It's like, nobody's going to go like, oh, it's black and white, I don't want to see that. They're going to go, oh, it's Vincent Price, I'll come to whatever Vincent Price is in.
Okay.
Corman felt that it was 1962 and that the audience expected color, especially for a historical costume drama, and that they would then feel cheated by the bait and switch, especially because it's Corman, it's Price, it's period. All of the other movies that have those three things were color. So Corman was like, the audience is going to get pissed off by this bait and switch. Small figured that by the time the audience is in the theater getting pissed off by the bait and switch, we've already got their money. So what does it matter?
Corman's always been forward thinking, like looking at where is the industry going, where are audiences going. And Small's like, his star is down, as you said. Mm-hmm. Like, he's old and crusty. Mm-hmm. I see why he's working with Smalls, but I disagree with it.
Yeah. So joining Vincent Price in the cast, we have Michael Pate as Sir Richard Ratcliffe, who is Richard's main toady in this version. We last saw Pate as the vampire in Curse of the Undead, which was the vampire western.
Oh, hell yeah.
And James Bond superfans will know him as Clarence Leiter in the 1954 version of Casino Royale. Others in the cast include Robert Brown, familiar to Trekkies from the episode The Alternative Factor, and one-time Elvis Presley co-star Joan Freeman. We've also got reliable heavy Bruce Gordon and Frankenstein's daughter herself, Sandra Knight.
Okay.
Now, Price was actually really happy with the part. He was so stoked to be Richard III, and he really put his all into the portrayal of Richard, and he thought the movie was great. Gene Corman actually thought the movie turned out all right, but Roger Corman was very unhappy, and he called this movie the most foolish thing I've ever filmed. He realized that neither he nor Small was going to get anything from their partnership together. Like Small was not going to be his ticket to the big time, and working with Small was not going to bring Small up either, because Small was going to be trying to hold Corman back, basically.
100%.
Right? And so he went to Small and he asked him to tear up their contract, which Small did after the shooting was completed. Like they both kind of realized like, oh, this isn't getting us anywhere. This isn't what we wanted. And Corman said, quote, "I have nothing against Eddie Small. He's an old man who had lots of success during the 30s, and he doesn't know that times have changed."
Kind of a backhanded compliment there, but all right.
I mean, it's basically what you said, right?
Sure, but like here I am sitting 50 years later, you know.
You know what's really funny is Small in the 1920s, when he first started producing films and he's in his 30s, has a quote where he says, "Movies are a young man's business, and like old men doing it get stuck in their ways and need to like back off, because in order to be successful in this business, you need to be innovating."
There's a similar like interaction between Danny DeVito and Mac on Always Sunny.
Okay.
Of like, not in the show, like when Danny DeVito is like being asked to ad lib and he's like, "No, like I'm old. I don't know what's funny. You tell me what's funny and I'll go in that direction."
Right. So Gene Corman noted that the picture opened well, had a good opening weekend, and then dropped off quickly.
Because it was a bait and switch.
Yeah. And once distributors and audiences realized it was black and white, audiences stopped coming and distributors stopped showing it. They brought it in for the opening weekend, then audiences dropped off, and it's like, okay, well, I can either keep this black and white movie in my theater or I can bring in a new color film. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
So the whole rationale that Small had, where it's like, oh, well, we already have their money by the time they're in the theater and they're upset. Corman was going, yeah, for one weekend.
Yeah, it's very short-sighted.
It's like, you're not going to have the long tail that you need.
Yeah.
Right? So that's exactly what happened. Yeah. That was the fate of Tower of London.
Welp. How are we watching it today?
Today, Sarah, we are watching Tower of London as part of the Vincent Price Collection Volume 3 on Blu-ray from Shout Factory.
Oh, so it's not even on like a Roger Corman collection.
No, it's a Vincent Price collection.
Yeah. Well, I think like it will at least be good to see Vincent Price having fun, right? Like he always gives a really solid performance.
Yeah, and Gene Corman thought the movie itself was good. So like maybe it is, right? I mean, here we are 60 years later, and I think, you know, given the nature of this podcast, it's clear that like a movie being in black and white is not a big problem for us. So I think we have the ability to like
take it on its own terms.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, folks, hopefully you can find a copy of this collection to watch along. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss The Tower of London from 1962, directed by Roger Corman.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Tower of London from 1962, directed by Roger Corman. Ben, what did you think of this movie?
I think it's a pretty big disappointment.
Yes, I would agree. It is a big disappointment.
It's kind of a nothing movie.
You explained why they made this movie, but I'm like, why did you make this movie?
Do you want to walk us through the synopsis and then we can start dissecting it?
Sure. To preface the synopsis, I'll just say that, like, this is, like, if you took Richard III, Macbeth, and Hamlet and put it into a blender and then tossed it onto, like, a fun mirror, you would get this movie.
Right.
It is not historically accurate at
No.
all. And yeah, takes from these other Shakespeare plays. So if things get confusing because they don't follow the historical record, that's why.
Sure.
I think it's also good to just like clarify that the movie is set at the Tower of London. All these people are living at the Tower of London.
Yes. No other locations exist.
No other locations. So that's the where the title comes from in this movie. We're set in 1483.
Yes.
So Edward IV is dying, and he names George, Duke of Clarence, to be the Lord Protector. In reality, he would have been dead for about 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Richard is kind of upset about his younger brother getting this honor, so he takes him drinking in the basement and straight up murders him.
Mm-hmm.
Puts his body into the cask of wine. He does feel guilty about this, but his wife, the Duchess Anne, is encouraging Richard to do these things in order for him to be king. Because of his guilt, Richard begins to be haunted by the ghost of Clarence, and Clarence says, "You'll die by a dead man at Bosworth." With George dead, Richard is then named the Lord Protector of the two sons, and Edward IV dies. Now, Richard has a hope to kind of delegitimize the two princes, Edward V and Little Richard, we'll say, not to be confused with the musician. So Richard, with his crony Radcliffe, get a woman named Mistress Shore. They are trying to convince her to say that the boys are illegitimate because she's the last person who would have been there when they were born, besides their mom. And she refuses, so they try to torture her to change her mind, and she ends up dying. Now, her ghost is haunting Richard as well, and in a moment of confusion and anger at this ghost, he goes to try to strangle it and ends up actually strangling his wife, Anne, and killing her. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, with her handmaiden, Margaret, Margaret's lover, Sir Justin, and the physician Tyrus are all worried about Richard and his ambitions. They're like, oh, he's a really evil guy. We really don't trust him, but we have to learn a little bit more about like what is it that he's planning. And Tyrus is like, well, he seems to be seeing things, so maybe using my physician powers of
it's 1483. He's a physician, so he's like
also a magician.
Yeah, like one half, half a foot in the magician category as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, I'll use my powers to try to like learn more about Richard's motives. Basically going to Richard and saying like, hey, you seem to be having trouble. I can cure you of these hauntings. And so they learn more about Richard actively trying to become king.
I think it's very telling when you look at like the Wikipedia page for this movie and you go to like the cast of characters section. If like a character's name doesn't have a link, that character's not a real person. And that is definitely the case for Sir Justin and Tyrus the physician.
Yes. I don't know when the name Justin became popular, but I can't believe that it was being used in the 1400s.
I don't know how commonly it would be in use in 15th century England, but I can tell you that it's kind of a Tiffany situation because the name Justin is Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tiffany as a name is much older than you think.
Yeah.
So our motley crew, who are worried about the safety of the crown and the princes, decide that they have to get Elizabeth and her two sons out of the Tower of London and get to sanctuary at Westminster. As they are all trying to sneak out, Justin and Edward V get left behind. Margaret also gets captured a little later. She was going to escape and then ride to go warn her father, Lord Stanley, in the north, in Scotland. But she gets captured and basically is treated as a prisoner, so Lord Stanley has to swear loyalty, otherwise Margaret will be killed. Richard and Radcliffe murder the two princes. Those ghosts then haunt Richard and try to lure him to fall off the battlements. Buckingham saves him in time, but then shares that he's concerned about Richard's mental health with Radcliffe, who then reports on him, and then Buckingham gets tortured and killed. Now, because Lord Stanley can't do anything because otherwise his daughter will get murdered, Tyrus helps Justin rescue Margaret from the torture chamber, but Tyrus dies in the process. But this means that Lord Stanley can start working with Henry Tudor and begin forming their armies and marching towards London. Richard forms his army and meets them at a place called Bosworth. There's a big battle filled with a lot of footage that is actually in the 1939 Tower of London, which we recognize because we recently watched Tower of London to remind us about that 1939 version. Radcliffe gets killed in the battle. Richard, after the heat of the battle, is kind of wandering the fields and begins to be followed by the ghosts of all the people he's killed. And as he's trying to get away from them, he ends up falling onto a dead man's battle axe. And that's how he is killed by a dead man. So all of the prophecies were foretold and came to fruition. And that's the end of the movie.
So the parts of this movie that are a horror movie, I would say,
torture.
Yeah, there's a lot of torture scenes in the Tower of London, a lot of murder and torture. That's certainly much more on screen in this version than the 1939 version, which also used the torture murder parts as the horror parts, with Boris Karloff as like the executioner, but always like cut away before you saw anything. And here we get things like they whip Mistress Shore and you see her like bloody whipped back and things like that. The other part of this movie that's like horror movie is this recurring motif of Richard being haunted by all the ghosts. And of course, you can see where different parts are coming from different plays. The overall characterization of Richard as the villain and sort of what characters are important, like Buckingham and Lord Stanley, come from Shakespeare's Richard III. The element of Richard feeling guilt about the murders, as well as his wife Anne being kind of a cheerleader in favor of murder, come from Macbeth, as does the like idea of like a convoluted prophecy about how he will be defeated in a way that seems impossible. Mm-hmm. And then you've got like all the, the ghost stuff, which is sort of coming from Hamlet.
I think the tortured mind is also coming from Hamlet.
True. Certainly the first ghost appearance, that's the Duke of Clarence on the battlements, feels a lot like the start of Hamlet. But a lot of the ghost stuff also just feels like traditional ghost storytelling. The whole motif of like, oh, this ghost showed up to piss me off, and when I tried to destroy it, I accidentally killed this other person, is certainly one that we've seen many times before.
And the use of like having Duchess Anne be like egging Richard on doesn't work after she's dead.
Right. So it feels really pointless. It's like you made this huge change to this character to make it feel more like Macbeth, but she dies like really early on.
And that was like a big problem for me with the movie, that like we would go from Richard being like either really guilty or truly seeming to be not in like our reality because he's like the way he's hallucinating, and then also interacting with the ghosts. It seems like he's like not in his proper mind. And then also immediately going into, but I'm a conniving manipulator who is following these machinations to become king. Like it didn't quite work, the switch between the two.
Yeah. So I think Vincent Price gives a good performance as the version of Richard III that's in this script.
Yeah.
The problem is that this version sucks. As you've already pointed out, he's written very inconsistently. This Richard III might actually be more libelous than Shakespeare's version, because for as evil as Shakespeare's version was, he wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
This one definitely is. By adding these elements of Macbeth and Hamlet, it ends up making Richard seem very weak and easily cowed and manipulated by these ghosts. Like he's like, I shall become king. And then he feels this guilt, and then he gets afraid of the ghosts, and then he's freaking out at the slightest little thing.
And also, like, when the children are the ghosts of the children are trying to lure him off the battlements, he's like, oh yeah, no one wanted to play with me when I was your age. And like, that's how he's getting lured. They're like, oh, well, come play with us forever and ever.
Yeah, he's like very much, even, whether the ghosts are real or part of his mind doesn't matter, because this is a story set in the 15th century.
Yeah.
But like, even without the ghosts, you get the sense that like he's not really he's a little off his rocker.
Yeah.
Right? His murder of George is now this thing that like sets off like a domino collapse of his sanity, as well as this like series of murders. The murder of Anne, which is like accidental. A lot of this stuff is ahistorical, right? Like, that's not how Anne died. That's not how, a lot of this happened. And in addition to like making Richard even worse than in Shakespeare, like a lot of the other characters become really flattened and one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Like Clarence, for instance, who dies early on but gets to stick around as a ghost for the whole movie. He's played by, I forget the actor's name right now, but he played the computer hologram Landru on an episode of original Star Trek. Anyways, Clarence is now like the wisest, nicest man in England.
Yeah, there's no wiser man in all of England.
Yeah, and he's like super nice and kind and loyal and just, and that's like to create even more contrast between him and Richard. But like IRL, like Clarence was like this guy who just kind of blew with the wind and like switched sides in the War of the Roses depending on whoever was being nice to him that day.
100%.
Not a very wise person at all. I think a lot of the changes to Richard here, where he accidentally kills his wife and then is like grieving her for the whole rest of the movie as he goes mad, are being done to turn Richard III into a classic Vincent Price crazy wife guy. Like he is in the other Poe movies.
Yeah, but the problem with that is like it makes the story not really make sense. And this is a story that is really, really well known. Mm-hmm. And I was also thinking like, why are they changing all of this stuff? Is it because it's like keeping us on our toes? Because it's like, oh, will he end up killing the princes? Because like none of these other people died this way. But no, like I don't know. I think you're absolutely right that they're trying to hit the formula of Vincent Price wife guy rather than Vincent Price as an actor.
Yeah.
The draw being him as an actor.
I think he's clearly enjoying playing Richard III.
I would say he's probably the best part of this movie.
Oh, undoubtedly. And I think these changes, do help differentiate this Richard from Shakespeare's Richard. But they also make him a much less interesting character. Like, why is this Richard so intent on winning the throne? It's just kind of blind ambition.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, in previous versions, for instance, the 1939 Tower of London with Basil Rathbone, that movie really emphasizes Richard self-identifying as a knight and a soldier. And the sense is that he thinks he needs to be king because he's the only one strong enough to be king. And so like we can't have these children running things. And then of course the Shakespeare version really hammers on the idea of like his misanthropic nature and resentfulness of his deformities kind of leading him to be like, I'm gonna be this asshole and get what's mine kind of thing, right? I think you're right that Prince is the best part of the movie. I don't think anyone else in the cast are bad, but the characters are so one-dimensional that there's nothing really memorable about them. Like Justin's just like the hero and so on. I think probably the most memorable person in the cast outside of Price is Richard Hale as Tyrus the physician.
Oh, I was going to say Michael Pate is Radcliffe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of Michael Pate, but I also don't think he gets quite enough to do here.
I just like when he's on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
I do think that there are some like good camera moves and lighting and like ghostly effects in the film.
Yeah, I think the camera work, the cinematography, all of that is done well. There's a lot of moving camera, and I think it also hides the cheapness.
Yeah, like the fact is that the story's very small cast and castle bound nature are very noticeable at times.
Yeah.
And the budget issues certainly become very apparent at the coronation, where there's a big crowd cheering Richard that we only hear and don't see. Or as you mentioned, the Battle of Bosworth Field, where we're reusing footage from the 1939 version. Of course, we can't reuse footage from Laurence Olivier's version because that movie was in color.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, this movie's just disappointing. Even just like what Roger Corman is doing, he's usually like looking so forward. So I think Smalls is really holding him back.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we like the camera movement, we like the cinematography. I think Corman's trying his best to like get some good performances here. I like a lot of the ghost stuff with like spooky candles and like Dutch angles, and like there's one section where like Richard's having a freak out, I guess, and the screen goes all wavy and like the castle seems to be like closing in around him as the walls shift.
There are too many people in this movie, too many characters. At least a lot of them die, but also their deaths have no impact.
Yeah.
The torture scenes have no impact.
Yeah, I think the torture of Mistress Shore is probably like a highlight in the movie, especially because Vincent Price gets to be Richard in that scene at his most like villainous. And I really enjoy that. But I think one of the big problems, and when you're talking about like the deaths don't really mean anything, I think that the Macbeth style prophecy at the start really renders the movie dramatically inert. And one thing that I found watching it throughout the whole movie is that like this is a movie where everyone in it knows Richard is evil from the get-go.
Yeah, that was a problem in the 39 Tower of London too.
Yeah, like a big thing in Shakespeare's Richard III is that Richard has to like play the nice guy in order to like get everything he wants. And in this movie, it's more like Richard is evil and he's plotting, and everyone knows he's evil and he's plotting, but everyone's acting like they don't know that, right?
Yeah.
Like no one has proof, so they're just like whatever. But like there's a scene where he's talking to his mom and his mom's like, yeah, you're evil.
Yeah, I wish you had never been born is basically what she says, that I died in childbirth with you.
And it's like everyone, once people are dead, then they know about Bosworth Field and can taunt Richard about it. And basically this movie is just sort of slowly converting the cast from living to dead throughout the runtime. But once they're dead, they stay in the movie because they become part of the ghost choir. And so you get this sense that not only does everyone know Richard is evil, but everyone knows Richard will be defeated at Bosworth Field after he becomes king. And so because of that, it's like everyone in this movie has already read history books about themselves.
Yeah.
It's like a movie that assumes you already know at least like the rough bullet points of the story. But then it goes really off the rails in telling that story. And I think part of that is trying to just do something different from the Shakespeare version. But even the 1939 Tower of London, which is not the Shakespeare play, sticks closer to the details of history than this movie. Like the 39 version still strays from history here and there, but like it knows what the Battle of Tewkesbury is, and it knows that like Edward went into the tower first and then they had to like request his brother later because Edward was lonely, and like it knows these certain details. And it makes me wonder about, the difference between 1939 and 1962, the like assumed education level of the audience, where it's like, I wonder, in 1939, it's like movies are entertainment for everybody. The whole family's going to come here. Everybody gets taught this history in school. We can't just be like, oh yeah, like Richard killed Anne. Like we have to kind of generally stick to what people know, even if it's our own interpretation. Whereas by the time you get to 1962, it's like, well, the family's staying at home and watching TV. The audience for movies is teens on dates. We're not really teaching like this kind of history as much in our schools. So we can kind of just like hit the broad points of things and otherwise focus on like being entertaining or doing what we think will have like shock value, but we don't need to like stick as much to the history.
I don't know if there's anything to that. Because we've seen movies in this time frame, like in the 60s, that have a lot of respect for the intelligence of our audience. So I don't know if that's necessarily why they feel they can just bounce around the historical record. Like when Roland Lee and his brother were working on Tower of London, like they went to the UK, they were like, oh, this is a cool story. Let's have a movie about it. They were inspired by the history. So it makes sense that they would want to stick closer to the history.
But I also think like the Roland Lee version has all of these British actors in it. Like you wouldn't be able to like Basil Rathbone would come on set and be like, wait a minute, Richard III wasn't like the brother of Hamlet. What are you talking about? Like, you'd have all the people in the cast would kind of like know better. And here it's like a lot of American actors. And I think they maybe just wouldn't be as concerned with it. I mean, obviously, at least Vincent Price, has probably done Shakespeare and knows the play.
Well, he was in Tower of London.
Yeah,
like,
right.
He fucking knows.
He clearly knows the story.
I think what you're drawing attention to, though, is like the people wouldn't care as much, like the people making this movie. And I think that would be correct because they know that this is a $200,000 picture made by folks who make schlock. Yeah,
and they're trying to like get it to be the horror formula of the Poe movies. So I do think that this movie's a good watch for fans of Vincent Price. Like if you really like Vincent Price, you should check this out. It's a fun performance by him, but there's really nothing else in this movie that's like worth recommending it for. Like I like a lot of the ghostly horror stuff in it, but you can also just watch the Poe movies and get a better version of that. And I like the story of Richard III, but like there are other better tellings of it. And I think the script here does occasionally have some good monologues. Like there is some dialogue and some language in the script that I think is really good and well written, but it also feels like it's constantly trying to avoid quoting Shakespeare.
Yeah, it felt like they had a thesaurus out.
Yeah, like find and replace.
Exactly, because it was Shakespeare-y.
It's Shakespeare-ish.
But not actually.
And that's so weird to me because Shakespeare is public domain.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no copyright on Shakespeare.
Or maybe Laurence Olivier would like shake a fist at them. But he's like
I don't think
used to seeing people do things.
Yeah, I don't think so. And like by 1962, the tradition of like doing different interpretations of Shakespeare is starting to become more mainstream. And like there are speeches in this movie where I was like listening to Vincent Price and going like, this is a good speech, but this is like the Temu version of the "Now is the winter of our discontent" speech.
Yeah.
Or like later in the battle, he's like, oh, like I'm all alone. Like, where are my men? Like, who is here to support me? And I'm like, oh, you're trying so hard not to say a horse, my kingdom for a horse. Like they're trying so hard to like say something else that gets across the same idea. And it made me think of how much more interesting this movie would have been if instead of like taking ideas from different Shakespeare plays and putting them together, if they had actually interpolated the text, like if you had speeches from Richard III, but then Anne comes in and is doing speeches of Lady Macbeth, and you're using language from Macbeth and language from Hamlet and language from Richard III and mixing them all together into a new story, because then at least your script isn't trying to outdo Shakespeare, which is like a loser's game.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of like how much smarter something like Chimes at Midnight is, which is like, hey, what if you took all the Prince Hal plays and you stuck them all together into one movie, but did it from Falstaff's point of view? Like there's smarter things you could have done here. And I think, a big problem this movie has throughout is that you're just like, it's like Netflix's The King with Timothée Chalamet, where it's like you're telling a Shakespeare story without doing Shakespeare. So the whole time I'm watching this, you're trying to fucking compete with Shakespeare, and in a way that's just going to remind people of Shakespeare, and that's not a winning game.
Yeah. So I wasn't a huge fan of this movie. Like I said, Price is great, Pate is great. There's some neat like camera stuff, but ultimately I think you could skip this for the 1939 version. But if you really are hankering for Richard III, check out Laurence Olivier's version.
Yeah, it's a problem that this movie comes 7 years after and is so much worse.
Yeah.
Did you know that when the Laurence Olivier version of Richard III played on TV, on American TV for the first time, it had such a high rating that it was estimated that that movie did more to expose Americans to Shakespeare than any other thing, that essentially more people in the US watched that TV broadcast than if you had added up the individual audiences of every play production of Richard III before then.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Because, well, you need to have a television, but it's a lot easier to access TV than it is to access a play.
Right. And so when I thought of like how well seen that TV broadcast was, it also made me go, so everybody watching this movie has seen a better version of this movie.
Sure.
You know?
Very likely. Well, let's move on to ranking.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement.
Okay. I will say, I don't think this is horror.
Okay, I think this is horror enough.
I disagree.
So I think this is... So at the start of this episode, I think I called this movie pseudo-historical pseudo-horror. I think that like the torture scenes and the ghost scenes are all being shot in a way that's trying to make this a horror movie. I think that like this is the way that, you know, if you ignore the history and you just look at the way this movie's story is structured, it's a ghost story. Like they've totally just structured it as guy does things that get him haunted, hauntings lead to his downfall.
I hear you, but Roger Corman did Tales of Terror.
Mm-hmm.
And the first story in that film does a better job of selling I should be afraid of a ghost than I could ever be afraid of Clarence. Or kids off of battlements or Buckingham or whatever. Like none of them are scary to me. They're just like hanging out.
You know what's something I noticed, small little detail, but like a perfect example of this movie's, I don't want to say ineptitude, but like not doing things well. Ineptitude, I guess, is still the best word. When the ghosts of the boys are floating in the air off the battlement and they're trying to like get Richard to like walk off the side of the battlement to join them, which would like lead to his death. They are superimposed onto the film as a double exposure, you know, standard ghost special effect, right? But as you look at them, they're also framed from, I think, the knees up.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you look at their little nightgowns, their nightgowns are like pulled up in the back by their heads.
As if they were filmed floating.
Right. So they rigged them to wires to float them in the air, but then they don't frame them so that you can see their feet, which means you can't tell they're floating. And because they are already a superimposition, they could just be standing.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't make any difference.
I was thinking about that. I was like, the amount of effort they probably had to go through to rig those kids up, those kids flying around, trying to deliver their lines, and they could have just had them standing.
Yeah. And then just to like shoot it in a way where it doesn't make any difference at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Anyways, perfect synecdoche for this whole movie. I thought this was horror enough that we could rank it. I think it's trying to be a horror version of this story. My range was really low.
I don't think that this is horror. I wouldn't count Hamlet as horror.
No.
And he's haunted.
True, but like I think this is closer to like,
I wouldn't count Macbeth as horror.
Yeah, I think this is like closer to like Yatsuya Kaiden to me in the sense of like the way the haunting works. Because like the ghost in Hamlet is like, you must avenge me, right? Whereas these guys are like,
you will die.
Stupid Richard, you probably can't do anything right. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like if you want to look at the gore and the torture as evidence for this being horror, they have no impact. Like I was into it when Mistress Shore is like being tortured and we get to see Richard at his most villainous, as you said. But that happens so early in the movie and it feels like it's like a way to ramp up and it never really delivers on anything further.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think the confused characterization of Richard becomes a really big problem because is he, you know, the bad guy or is he the victim?
And I think this movie spends so much time on like Elizabeth and her little friends trying to figure out like, oh, what is Richard up to? We know he's up to no good. Oh, let's get us out of the tower.
That whole section where they're trying to escape the tower didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Han and Luke getting Leia out of the Death Star sort of thing. Like they're sneaking around guards and they're like doing silent takedowns and they're like fighting their way through traps and stuff. And the movie had not established
that they were in any danger,
that they were trapped in any way,
that like guards would do anything to stop them.
Right. Like this is the, you know, the Dowager Queen and like the new king, not yet coronated, like the king to be, and his brother and a bunch of their like servants, basically. They could have just walked out the front door and it probably would have been fine. Like the movie's script had not yet established that Richard had made any order that they had to like stay where they were.
Yeah.
So that whole section was weird and didn't work for me at all.
Yeah. To me, this isn't horror.
It's tough because they definitely were trying to market it as horror for sure. The tagline was, "Can you survive 83 minutes in the Tower of London?"
Yeah, quite easily.
It's tough because I think one of this movie's central problems is that it doesn't really know what it's trying to do.
Yeah. I think we see more torture in the 1939 version because we get like pans over the torture room.
Yeah, I think, but like we're more explicit here for sure.
Yeah, more targeted.
Yeah. And the thing is that like the haunting scenes really make me think of horror movies. But
we know Corman knows how to film scary ghosts, and he chose not to.
I don't know. I'm very conflicted. For the record, my range was 247 to 275.
So that is Monster on the Campus down to Bloodlust.
Yeah, so right above Monster on the Campus is like The Unknown. And what I was really looking for when I tried to figure this out was for some reason my brain kept thinking of The Sealed Room, where I was like, The Sealed Room is scarier than this, which is 238. Sure. And then I was like, I went down and I was like, well, The Unknown's a better movie than this. So that became my ceiling. And then it just like, I just started looking for like, when do the movies get worse made than this? And I hit Bloodlust at 275. If you're looking at the movies in this range, I think the question I would ask you is like, do those movies feel more like horror? You know, is The Invisible Ray more of a horror movie than this?
Yes. Circus of Horrors, which I also had a challenging time with because it was so tepid. That is definitely more horror than this. Giant from the Unknown, Man Beast, even Neanderthal Man is in here. The Mummy from 59.
What about movies like Song at Midnight or the 1941 version of Black Cat?
So the problem with those is those make sense as horror for where the genre is at that time.
Right.
Whereas this is coming from a director who we know can do horror and does horror very, very well, even on a low budget.
What do you think if this movie isn't horror? Because, I mean, one thing that I always try to bring up when we do these rankings is like bad horror is still horror. Like if something's trying to be horror and failing, I think it's still horror. It just ranks low. So for it to not be horror, in my mind, it has to be trying to be something else.
Mm-hmm.
What is the thing that it is trying to be if it's not trying to be horror?
I think, honestly, it's trying to be a bit of a tragedy thriller. Maybe not thriller. You know the type of play where it's like the Greek tragedy of like, oh, like you see how the ending's going to happen and he can't avoid it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the tradition it's trying to go for, which is a very theatrical, as in like play kind of theatrical tradition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I can see that for sure. Just the way that they're like evoking these different Shakespeare stories, which are all tragedies. And you would say that like the use of like the ghosts and the violence and everything there is more just akin to the structure of that kind of story than like a horror story that's trying to scare you.
Yeah. At no point did it feel like I was supposed to be scared. I think I was supposed to be horrified at the death of Mistress Shore. But then when they go to torture Buckingham by putting a rat into a cage in his head, like there was no emphasis on that event. Like the camera doesn't stay on his face as he screams. Like it's just like Buckingham's death is honestly very like lackluster, and like he also has no role in the movie until he saves him from the battlement. So like it's like why is this guy even here?
He's here because he's in the Shakespeare play.
Like Josie and the Pussycats.
Well, it's like Stanley is not actually like Lord Stanley in history is not super important at Bosworth Field, but he's super important at Bosworth Field in the Shakespeare play because he was the ancestor of the guy who was like sponsoring the writing of the play. So Shakespeare like boosted up his ancestor's role in the historical story. And then because that's this movie's main source for these characters, he's like important here, right? So it's like even when they're trying to get away from Shakespeare, it's clear that the Shakespeare play is their main source.
Yeah.
Okay, I will buy the idea that this is meant as like tragedy, as like a tragedy. And I think you are right about like the ghosts are trying to be freaky to Richard, and the gore in the torture scenes is meant to be like gruesome. But I think you're right that there's nothing that feels like it's trying to like scare the audience or make the audience dwell on anything horrific for too long. Okay, well, I feel conflicted about this, but I will agree with you in this case.
Okay.
Especially because like there have been times in the past where we've moved things onto the miscellaneous list, like Incredible Shrinking Man, which I think is more haunting than this movie is. So okay, I'm willing to fall on the this is about as much horror as it is history side of the debate.
All right. Well, folks, if you would like to see the list or the miscellaneous part of the list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the other episodes we have mentioned, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest us placing this movie on the miscellaneous list, please get in touch through our Ask Box on Tumblr, email us at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com, or talk with us on Blue Sky or Patreon.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud, and you can find us on most other podcasting apps. And if you'd like to help the show out, you can leave us a rating or a review on one of those apps. You can also share the show on social media, tell your friends about it, or if you really like what we do, you can be a big help by going to patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons at the $5 and $10 levels get access to regular bonus content. That includes writing, bonus audio. Sarah just put up another one of her very cool audiobooks of a horror short story.
Yeah, The Ghost Summons by Ada Buisson.
And oftentimes, like, reviews go up of contemporary movies maybe that we, aren't ever going to get to on the show for a very long time, or things that we're reading. Maybe Sarah will share some thoughts from It Came From the Closet on the Patreon at some point. So there's all kinds of cool stuff. And when you sign up, you're going to get access to like the whole library of it. So there's a ton of cool stuff and bonus episodes of the show and so on that you can check out by going to patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast.
So, Ben, what are we watching next week?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
I don't know. Should I look her up on Facebook?
Next week, we are watching a classic progenitor of the, I think it's called like the Crazy Old Biddy subgenre.
Okay.
It was a huge hit. It gets a lot of copycats, much imitated but never bested. Joan Crawford and Bette Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Amazing. I'm excited to see this. I've never seen it.
Well, you are in for a huge treat. I'm super excited for you to get to watch it, and I'm sure it'll be a big episode, so you do not want to miss it, Creatures of the Night.
We'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.